I used to tell my students not to idealize Japan, because many people see Japan like perfect, like everything is beautiful, and of course there are many many beautiful things, but it has like as I said, everything has the dark side, like the dark side of the moon.
こんにちは皆さん、ビジネスサクセスジャパンのポッドキャストへようこそ。Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Business Success Japan podcast. This is your host, Liddy Buchelman. My main goal here is to create an easily accessible resource for those who want to develop Japan-specific communication skills, especially in business. While I can't and won't promise to make you fluent in Japanese, I hope that you will walk away from each episode with a skill, piece of information, or shift in mindset that will help you be more effective in your interactions with Japanese business people. Before we get into the episode today, I wanted to take a quick second to thank the people who have taken the time to rate and review the podcast so far. It goes a long way to helping people find and learn from the show, so I really appreciate it. My first review was actually from Kasha Mish, who I believe is Kasha of Michigan, who is actually my very first guest on the podcast. Here's the review that she left. Lydia does a very good job with teaching you the phrases as well as giving you the background to understand why it is important. Nicely done. If you haven't already heard her episode, you should definitely check it out. She covered the topic of horenso, and it's actually the very first interview I've had on this podcast, but she was gracious enough to kind of be my guinea pig, so be sure to check that out. She has a lot of great information to share. All right, so today's guest is Byron Barón, a Venezuelan native now based in Madrid, whose mission is to provide creative people such as himself with the skills they need for success in Japan. His company, which I will probably butcher the pronunciation of, Contactojapon, specifically addresses the Spanish-speaking community, but he's very active on LinkedIn in both English and Spanish, so he's definitely worth following there. He even has a podcast with the same name as his company, so also be sure to check it out if you're a Spanish speaker. But before we get into today's episode, let's go over a little bit of Japanese. In the previous episode, we covered an important word in Japanese business that roughly translates to betterment or improvement. Kaizen. Kaizen. Today we'll go over a phrase that has come up a few times on the show so far, but is definitely worth learning properly. 空気を読む。空気を読む。空気を読む。空気 is a word that can mean everything from air to mood or situation. Yomu means to read, and o is the Japanese particle that connects the direct object to the verb of the sentence. Be sure to check out the description of the episode to see the structure. So the literal translation of this sentence would be to read the air, but the closest equivalent expression in English would probably be to read the room. But essentially, it means to pay close enough attention to the people you're interacting with to understand what's going on without the need for anyone to explain it explicitly, and also to adapt your own behavior accordingly. As Japan has a notoriously high context culture, this is an important idea to wrap your head around, and Byron will touch on this a little bit later in the episode. So without any further delay, let's get into today's conversation.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for this opportunity and also congratulate you for your wonderful podcast. I've been listening to almost all your episodes and you're doing a great job. So I'm very honored. I'm very pleased to be part of your work and I want to thank you for that. My name is Byron Barón. I am from Venezuela, currently based in Madrid since 2014. My story with Japan, my love with Japan started when I was 8 years old. I was suffering bullying at the school, and my dad was tired of that and sick of that, and almost every day some boy did bullying. Mm-hmm. And then my father took me to karate lessons, and everything started there. I was so impressed because even though my teacher, my sensei, was not Japanese, he had been training and he had a very close relationship with Japan and his Japanese sensei. So he took all that experience, that discipline, and even the style of the dojo, the tatami, everything was so Japanese. At the time, I didn't have any idea of a real Japanese dojo. But then when I practiced Aikido and Kendo in Tokyo, first time I went into a real Japanese dojo, my very first dojo at home came to my mind. That experience was really, really strong, really important in my life, and I would say that put me in the way of Japanese soul or Japanese feeling or culture, as you can say. Then, well, I grew up and I didn't continue with karate, but like almost 10 years after, I was about 18, 19, I was at the university. I started practicing Aikido because a friend of mine, he invited me to an Aikido lesson, and I was attracted by Aikido, but I had never practiced it. And then from Aikido, I started Zazen, practicing Zen meditation, and that was like a baptism, I would say. It was like a very, very strong connection with meditation, with Japanese philosophy, with this Japanese point of view on approaching or feeling your surroundings and your communication with yourself and the people, the concepts of silence, the concept of Zen. Well, the concept, it's difficult to put it in a concept. But to make it short, I decided to study in Japan, and I applied for the Monbusho scholarship. That time was Papa Monbusho, we called it. and I was lucky. I was one of the 2 students granted that year, and then I went to Tokyo to study. Well, I started in Saitama Daigaku University. I had to take a 6-month intensive course on Japanese and Japanese culture there. And then I started my research in art. I studied art and performing arts specifically. And then I went to Tokyo National University of the Arts, Tokyo Geijutsu Daigaku, and studied music there. In 2004, I got my master's degree. And then, I went back to Venezuela. I had an experience, a working experience. As I think 99% of the foreigners have teaching English and also Spanish in my case to kids. But also I had a very fruitful and very rich experience in the field of fashion and also on the entertainment. I mean, music and television also. So, well, I went back to Venezuela. Then almost a year later, I was invited to work at the World Expo, Aichi Banpaku in 2005. And after that, from 2005 to 2008, I worked at the Embassy of Japan in Venezuela with the consul. And from 2008 to 2013, 5 years, my last experience with the direct experience with working with Japanese people was with Sojitz Corporation as a brand manager for Mitsubishi Motors. First, directly on the advertising and marketing team, and then at the technical office with engineering and projects. So, well, that's my story with Japan. I tried to make it short, but
no, I love how
that
just
is
diverse and deep and broad all of your experiences are. It's great to see how many different things you can do in a single career. Even though it all surrounds one topic, it's still so many different opportunities you can break into, which is awesome.
Exactly. When I see my CV, when I was looking for a job here in Spain, some people say, okay, it will be difficult because you are not, first, you study arts, but you never had a direct and solid experience in art. But then when I realized that all my working experience, even though it was apparently, not apparently, directly or very clearly from different areas, it has one like essence, a common point, which was the connection with the Japanese language and culture. So in the end, I said, well, if this is my core, so I would follow that, and now I will focus all my work on promoting this information I have, this experience I have, and that's what I'm doing now. And your second question is about, isn't it?
Right. Yes. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you're doing now, because there is such a need for quality information and sharing that information well with people. So could you tell us a little bit about your work right now?
Sure. I'm working, I'm almost completely dedicated to cultivating, which is a website dedicated to promote Japanese language and culture. Now specifically to students and professionals on creative fields. And why do I specify on that? Because when I started in Venezuela, I was so in love with many areas, and I wanted to take advantage of my contacts on different fields. So I was very naive at that time, I think, because I wanted to talk about architecture, music, arts, food, tourism, economics, everything. Mm-hmm. Then I realized that I was I was not focusing on anything special, and I was wasting work, time, and energy. And it took me 4 years to realize that, and also martial arts, of course. But in the end, I realized that I had to focus on the most important part of my community. Then I checked all my contacts and my database, my history, all the people I was working with, my students, and I realized that more than half of all that people were directly or indirectly related to creative careers. They were either designers, photographers, chefs, filmmakers, writers, etc. So I said, okay, I should concentrate communication, content, activities on that public, on that dedicated to that people, to these areas. And from that, it was like a reborn. It was like it flourished. It was more, the reaction were much more positive and meaningful also. So that's why I'm doing this emphasis on the promotion of Japanese culture for students and professionals on creative careers.
Yeah, I really love that, just because, at least in my thinking, before hearing you talk about it, I kind of thought about Japanese learning in three categories, where you had academic, like if you were planning on going to college, you would have a certain path that you go on, a certain grammar points that you focus on and things like that. Business, of course, kind of has its own important subsection that if you're going for business, you need to learn some things and don't need to bother with other things. And then like just general language skills, which most textbooks probably cover. So I love that you niched down a little bit to focus on your demographic.
Exactly. So, yeah, and also because I think that in a more sensitive or deep sense, I think that seeing what is happening around, we need more art, we need more sensitivity, we need more creation, we need more. I mean, might sound like a romantic, but we need more beauty, we need more creation, art in our life, in our everyday. So I think that Japan, I'm not, I used to tell my students not to idealize Japan, because many people see Japan like perfect, like everything is beautiful, and of course there are many many beautiful things, but it has like as I said, everything has the dark side, like the dark side of the moon. Just I decided to focus and to work and dedicate my work to this community, because I think that Japan has a wide and a very big extensive palette of resources to inspire people from any creative career. You can find a lot of resources to create, to develop your work, your artistic work, and I want, since that's what I lived there, I want to help people to reach it, also to fulfill that purpose also.
Mm-hmm. I like that you make a point of instilling in your students not to think of Japan as a promised land, because I majored in Japanese in college, and a lot of the people in my class kind of looked at Japan that way. And the majority of the people who were most, I guess, blindly optimistic about Japan being a perfect country where they would come into their own and fit in completely, tended to really burn out hard once things started getting difficult in Japan. So, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. It's and especially, yeah, and when you don't have, and I think we will talk about this later, but if you don't have some basic resources to understand Japanese people, it won't be that promised land, as you said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you can't read people, it's going to be hard to function very well in society. You're just going to be walking around confused, and understanding the culture is very important. So then,
it's essential.
Yeah, it's essential. So a lot of your work then has to do with helping people learn the culture and language skills that they need, especially in their creative careers. And are there any concepts that you share with them that you think make the biggest difference for people when they go to Japan?
Yeah, definitely. There are many concepts. I have seen that you have talked about some of them in your previous interviews, and I want to talk about the concept of because I think it's essential to understand Japanese people, Japanese culture, because it represents the space, pause, or the lapse, both in time or space. And from my, it has a lot of relevance in art and philosophy, but since your podcast is related to business, I also find, well, not only me, but many people find it deeply connected to business. Ma is it is represented with two kanjis. Well, only one kanji, sorry, but this kanji is composed by two kanjis. One is like mon from door, and nichi or he from sun or day. And it's like the mon from which the sun or the light goes through, the space that allows you to meditate, to analyze, to step back, to take your time, and before acting. And that has a very deep meaning in communication, because in art it could be represented on empty space, on blank spaces. If you talk about music, in silence, the pause between two sounds, or in theater, either Japanese or Western theater, that space when the silence comes and the audience get like, what is happening or what will happen. But in business, it's also very important, because it might I would say it's necessary for both parts or both parties in a negotiation to understand what is happening and to prepare themselves for giving the right question. In Japanese companies, I worked 3 years at the embassy and also 5 years in a corporation. And I could understand that being with Japanese, working directly with Japanese people. But when I had to work with Japanese and Venezuelan or Spanish people, I was in the middle and trying to make both parties to understand that concept, because the Japanese side needed and actually took time to evaluate what was happening, and the Western side wanted a quicker question, wanted a quick response, and they eventually got stressed or anxious. So those were specific times when I had to explain, or I had to try to help explaining the concept of ma, which is a necessary time, a necessary space to feel the atmosphere, to meditate, to analyze, and reflect on the situation you are working on.
Yeah. So then what does Ma have to do with effective communication? Is it just because people are actually taking the time to properly think through what the other person said and properly formulate what they want to say next? Is that what makes it so important in Japanese culture, or is there something else?
Well, I think that effective communication comes when one part speaks, the other listens carefully in silence,
Mm-hmm.
and then the second part, after listening, answer, and the other part listen carefully, also like a real dialogue, not two people trying to overlap the other, or as we are used to see here in Western countries, like 3-4 people speaking at the same time. No one is listening. Everyone wants to impose his voice or her voice. In effective communication, these pauses, these spaces between one idea and the answer, I think the ma is there. On everyday communication, on a business communication, I think ma is the necessary pause to listen to the other person and take your time to answer back.
Yeah, what you mentioned earlier about having things take a little bit longer. It's funny seeing how all of these different concepts interact, because one big reason for that long ma is probably another Japanese concept where they have to get everybody to agree to it. It has to go through all the managers. Everybody has to buy into it, and then they get back with the decision. So
exactly, and that's something we cannot always understand, and we are aware of those concepts. Just imagine people who have no idea on those realities. So that is a big gap, and if a company or a businessman or a manager doesn't have an idea of that might harm the negotiation, and that may harm a whole project.
So not dealing properly with this ma, would it cause problems because the other party seems too pushy? Would that kind of turn off the Japanese party, or how would they react if the other party wasn't kind of matching their ma?
It depends on the company, on the area, because if it's a very traditional company, they might feel annoyed. They might even retire. They might even step back from what they are doing. But I would say it will. It's definitely a delicate or tense point, because if there is no a common dual understanding, of course the negotiation or the process, the business will not go as smoothly as it should go.
So then, in your experience, what parts of ma tend to be the hardest for people from Western cultures to deal with? Is it just these pauses in conversation, the lack of quick decision-making turnaround? What do you think people tend to have the hardest time with?
With silence.
Mm.
Yeah. Western people, and also either in everyday life or in business, I've seen it from all these years. They can hardly deal with silence, and for Japanese people, silence is gold. Chinmoku wa kin, and that is. I think that would be an aspect of ma, which is truly difficult to understand for Western people. What to deal with that silence, to manage what is happening in that space when the Japanese part is not answering, or is taking more time to offer an answer, or when they just don't answer. Also, that may happen. Also, they just don't answer, which might be rude, of course, but it might happen, and sometimes it's difficult for us or for many of Western people to understand that silence is also an answer. And I think is the most difficult part of ma to understand or to assimilate for Western people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one reason it just takes me so long to edit these episodes is because I'm obsessed with trying to trim things down, make it as efficient as possible, just because I know that when people listen to podcasts, especially in the States, if there's a big pause, they'll just be like, why isn't it going faster? Why are there all these pauses? I can't deal with this. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I understand you. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, you see it in theater, for example. I mean, Western theater, Japanese theater, or Western music, Japanese music, or paint. You have to feel in the West, you have to feel everything, every space, physical or non-physical. You have to feel it with words, with sounds, with everything. well, not in Japan. In Japan, the void, the empty space is also meaningful, very meaningful.
So then can you tell us a little bit about ku ki o yomu? So I feel like this would be very closely related to it. Can you explain a little bit about what that is and maybe how you learn how to do it, if there is a way to really learn how to do it?
Well, ku ki o yomu.
Yeah, it's a big
that, I mean, for being able to understand what is happening, I think you should develop like I don't know if a sixth sense or intuition or a special perception. Just understand that some specific gestures or some specific words, like, that when they cannot say no, they don't want to say no, they just say, それはちょっと難しいね. And some people don't understand it. They say, okay, yeah, it's difficult, but let's try it. And no, man, he's saying no.
Yeah.
So that's something that Western people don't understand. In a moment, I didn't understand it also. I thought he was saying just, it's difficult. And I was pushing. I was saying, oh, yeah, it's difficult, but we can do it. And after time, and that was a lesson from Japanese mind, they were saying no. Mm-hmm. And like that, there are many other examples. I don't know how to develop a way to read what is happening, to read the behind the curtain, what is happening behind the words, behind the face, behind the expressions, what some specific smiles mean. I mean, they are not happy, they are nervous, or they are not celebrating, they are telling you to leave, for example. So it is fascinating. And I think I couldn't say how to develop that, but it's something you definitely catch after not only studying Japanese language, Japanese culture, but living there, because you can read a lot, and there are 3 fantastic books on Japanese gestures and culture, but you have to live it. You have to be there and understand what they really mean behind what they are saying or showing. That what is true about the honne and the tate, right? What they show and what they really mean. So if you know these concepts, you know that that might be happening. So you have to live it to understand it.
Yeah, it's just study, practice. Paying attention is probably the most important thing you can do, but it's easier to pay attention if you've studied it before.
Exactly. So. Being there, being in the moment, being actively, here and now, aquí ahora, ima kokon, right? Being very perceptive of the situation.
Mm-hmm. But I'm the first one to acknowledge that it's hard to be present, especially if you're new to Japan, because you're busy trying to translate things in your head, because you're like, oh, I have to say this thing in Japanese. Oh, I don't quite know the grammar. So yeah, it just takes time. Just be patient with yourself and do your best, because it does get easier.
Yeah, it takes time, and that's why you must be patient and aware of that. Yeah, just with the disposition to know it, and being respectful and passive in a way. I mean, not to go okay, here I am. I'm American, I'm Venezuelan, I'm Italian, I'm whatever, and I'm here in Japan, and this is the way I am. Or, I find many people behaving like that, and
Mm-hmm.
I feel ashamed for them.
Oh no.
And when you have that approach, I mean, it's like things are not going to go well. So one, not advice, but suggestion I could offer is just to control yourself and just see in silence, observe, watch, listen to the situation, to the people talking to you, and be passive. Just wait until being said what to do or what not to do.
So then, can you think of anything that foreigners can do to help cope with this uniquely Japanese ma? Is there, because part of it is just an anxiety thing. You just want to keep things going. You want to make sure that you're in control in some way. I feel like that's one reason Americans especially just like to fill the spaces. It makes us feel like we're in some amount of control. So do you have any advice in that area of coping with it?
Well, first, if it's no matter if it's a short trip for tourism or business, or if you're gonna study there for a year or work, or if you are definitely moving to Japan, first things I would suggest is to read about Japan, to inform yourself about basic etiquette or the culture, the society of Japan. There are 3 books I'd like to recommend on this sense. One is Japanese Gestures by Tada Michitaro. This is a very it's a short book. It's a very easy to read, and it's fascinating how he describe and how he explained the essential Japanese gestures. Another one which will help a lot is An Introduction to Japanese Society by Sugimoto Yoshio. And last but not least, Understanding Japanese Society by Joy Hendry. There's those 3 titles. You can find them in Amazon. These 3 books will give you like a very serious and easy to read overview of Japanese people and culture. And another suggestion would be just try to meditate and have some silence in your day.
Yeah.
And also, of course, studying Japanese. I mean, just having at least a clue of the basic Japanese expressions and the polite Japanese, of course, because that will make a big difference, Yeah, well, you perfectly know the very first impression. You if you don't use the formal Japanese in the first expression, you will go nowhere with that person. I mean, that first expression is essential. So just take a time to learn at least the Hajimemashite, Watashi wa Byron desu, yoroshiku onegai itashimasu, and that will help a lot.
Yes, and I'm a big proponent of learning the language and the culture at the same time, because you just can actually remember things so much better if you understand, oh, this is because in the culture you think about things this way. That's why it's phrased this way. So it's definitely good to study both concurrently.
Definitely. That's a very important point. I have studied some, not many, but other 2-3 languages, and I haven't found any other language so deeply connected with the culture. I mean, of course, you will learn more and better any language if you also study the culture. But especially, but in Japanese, I find it very particular that knowing the culture will help you to understand and apply and improve your Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't happen with, I don't know if it happens with other languages, but in Japanese it's so so important, so evident, that connection between language and culture.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that one. Because with other languages, it feels like it definitely adds to it, but it almost feels like Japanese and Japanese culture are just, you can't take them apart from each other. It's not Japanese culture without the language, and it's not the language without the culture. It's just impossible to take them apart.
Exactly. It was quite interesting to deal with the rhythm and the speed that the Venezuelan part was requiring, and the rhythm and the speed of the Japanese process. So one was too slow or too fast for the other, and that made us suffer sometimes. You know?
Yeah, it's hard enough managing people, let alone managing two conflicting at times cultures. So I definitely respect you doing all that work.
You know, it's a challenge. That's why I think that now many Japanese companies are, for example, here in Europe, I've seen that here in Spain, most of the Japanese companies, almost all, I wouldn't say all, but I think like 80% are not, they don't have Japanese executive. I mean, they have local executive, and they report to Germany. And like the European, the headquarters are in Germany, and then from Germany they report to Japan. I think they have been aware of these cultural and businesses, culture differences, and living on or trusting more. I mean, like giving more space to local managers will definitely make things easier for promoting that brand in that country.
Little bit of a tangent, but we had mentioned something about this in kind of our pre-conversation. You mentioned that you're kind of seeing a renaissance on LinkedIn in terms of good Japanese content from professionals. Would you mind talking a little bit about what you're seeing recently on LinkedIn that's kind of encouraging or inspiring to you?
I'm seeing and I'm enjoying new people, new content, new approaches, and LinkedIn, especially in LinkedIn. I'm very active in LinkedIn lately, and new perspective, very interesting people interviewing Japanese people who are sharing different and sometimes new sides or new aspects of Japan that we were not aware of like 3, 5, or not to say 10 years ago. So I'm watching like as you say, like a renaissance, like a reborn of Japanese fresh culture, more lively, colorful, more dynamic with the interaction or with the interaction of foreigners, professionals, people from any part of the globe, Indians, Africans, New Zealanders, Americans, Italians, Venezuelans. It's more open, and they are giving us more interesting and inspiring aspects of Japan and Japanese culture. And I hope this may encourage more people to try at least once their life this experience of living in Japan, or working or studying in Japan, and I want to work for that also.
Yeah, I've only just recently stumbled into kind of this new, well, not new, but refreshing community about Japan on LinkedIn. And I definitely recommend that people go try to get involved. There's some great groups that you can join. You can probably also go through my podcast history and just check out the names. I think most people would be happy to connect with you on LinkedIn. So definitly recommend it.
What did you like the most about this? What is happening? That is happening in LinkedIn.
I just like that there are so many new perspectives, because culture isn't this big stagnant thing. It's the product of individuals behaving in a certain way with other people. So obviously you're describing it. It isn't an actual thing. It's something that you describe. So the more perspectives you have on it, the better and more complete view you have of it. So having more perspectives from diverse people is a very important thing, I think.
Exactly. And it's also very interesting because the traditional structure is like not dissolving, but now you have these startups, communities, and entrepreneurs, and Japanese young professionals who definitely don't want to go to the big corporation. So instead, they want to run their own business in whatever, from fintech to food. But this is very interesting because it is giving a completely new dimension to the traditions, or the business, even the business culture, because until 5-10 years ago, you have I think the protocol or the etiquette will not die soon,
right?
But now you might be going for a business meeting with a 25 years old boy without a suit. Just with a t-shirt and a hipster's look. So that is interesting, what is happening. I would like to see the world of business with Japanese entrepreneurs or startups in these few coming years.
Yeah, it'll be very exciting to see. So then, getting back on track a little bit, we're running kind of toward the end of our time. So I would love it if you could share an example from your life of a communication breakdown in Japan that you think was due to differences in culture.
As maybe at the beginning, when I just couldn't understand why some friends, some people, some Japanese classmates I was hanging around with, they suddenly I don't know, changed their mind, or those reactions that you never understand, like you say, why? But nothing that relevant to remember. Just like small moments, like very specific short situations, or small situations.
Yeah.
But yeah, also because I took some time studying about what I was going to find, and also had friends who explained me, don't do this, don't do that, and be careful with this, or don't expect that. So in that case, I was kind of prepared. So I couldn't say I really had an important communication breakdown.
Yeah, just a lot of small things. They can add up over time, but if you know how to manage it, it's not too overwhelming.
Yeah. At the beginning you don't understand, but then you say, okay, well, just whatever. I'm his friend for drinking. I'm not his friend for studying, or I'm not his friend for talking about my life. No, I'm his friend for drinking. Only that. So I think you also lived it, right? You know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a little bit of compartmentalization, which I think you get anywhere, but it's a little bit more unspoken there, as with a lot of things.
Yeah.
So if you were chatting with somebody who's going to Japan for business, and you really only had one thing to teach them about the culture before they got there, what would you tell them? What would you warn them about?
Watch before open your mouth. Follow what the others do, and be respectful.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. So is there anything you'd like to quick tell my audience before we head off for today?
Well, for your audience, study Japanese, read about Japan, and enjoy Japan, and be ready for a probably life-changing experience. Now we have a lot of resources, and your podcast is definitely a very good resource with sharp and precise information on how to understand and how to manage Japanese culture, Japanese business culture. So just be ready to learn, be ready to understand and open yourself to a completely different world. And that's all.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and your experiences and your insights. I learned a lot, and I'm sure that everybody listening will too. I hope that you enjoyed today's conversation. Be sure to check out the links in the description of this episode to learn more about Byron, his company, and all of his activity on LinkedIn. Please remember to go ahead and subscribe and leave a rating and review if you enjoy the podcast. And feel free to email me at businesssuccessjapan@gmail.com if you have any other questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes or interview topics. Also, be sure to reach out if you would like to contribute as a guest on the podcast to share your own cultural insights into doing business in Japan. But for now, remember that the more you learn, the more confident you will become as you explore all of the opportunities Japan has to offer you. Until next time, mata kondo.